People don't believe or understand that a community can lose hope. You can have a whole community where hopelessness is the norm, where folks don't have faith that things will get better because history and circumstances have proven over 30, 40, or 50 years that things don't get better. Everyone sees something different in Endgame, a biblical apocalypse, a portrait of painful codependency, a confession of guilt and dignity in the face of death, a night of baffling hopelessness, a meaningless babble. Each interpretation reveals an absurd truth, not about the play, but about the person watching it. If you look at a lot of kids from the inner city, there's this overwhelming sense of hopelessness and despair, and I dealt with that firsthand. Cycling is the only way to free ourselves from the misery of the tube, the wall-to-wall buses that line Oxford Street, the hopelessness of even thinking about driving. I believe a lot of what contributes to the sadness and downward spiraling in our lives is a sense of hopelessness. We become resentful when circumstances aren't unfolding as we want, leading us to doubt whether we will ever get what we want. We have to get behind the scientists and push for a dementia breakthrough. It could be that we fear dementia out of a sense of hopelessness, but there is hope, and it rests in the hands of our scientists. Don't let anyone tell you what you cannot do. My whole life I had people tell me you'll never do that or you'll never be that. Things people said I'd never be able to do, I'm doing. I try and stress that to kids. A lot of inner city kids have an overwhelming sense of hopelessness. I have to explain that there is hope. I didn't really want to live, so anything that was an investment in time made me angry, but also I just felt sad. When the hopelessness is hurting you, it's the fixtures and fittings that finish you off. Nothing prompts creativity like poverty, a feeling of hopelessness, and a bit of panic. Few years ago when I visited a palliative care center in Chennai for the first time, it completely moved me. It's an emotionally draining experience. I saw and met patients who were abandoned by their families, and there is complete sense of hopelessness. Ever since, I have been a supporter for the need for funding and awareness of palliative care. Some people might look at Baltimore, from afar, and see nothing but hopelessness. I see, in Baltimore, tremendously good and compassionate people, and a tremendous opportunity to save a lot of lives. Hopelessness is the seed of crime. If every man had a goal and some hope for reaching it, we could really reduce crime. What I would say to the young men and women who are beset by hopelessness and doubt is that they should go and see what is being done on the ground to fight poverty, not like going to the zoo but to take action, to open their hearts and their consciences. It's not attractive to be talking down about yourself all the time. All you continue to do to yourself is pull yourself further down into a deeper place of depression and sadness and insecurity and fear and hopelessness. So it's like, having God in your life is important, accepting who you are is important, regardless of what you look like. There is a dream on the street. I hear it constantly, finding a piece of land, raising food, building a house. I hear talk of hopelessness. The price of land, you know, housing is impossible. They are trapped in a cycle. How can you ask for a job after you've been sleeping in the bushes all night? Parallel to our vast strides in technology, there is a dangerous rise in unemployment, foreclosures, and degrading education. Millions of people are stricken with hopelessness and strife. Sadly, in the name of progress we have polluted the air, water, soil and the food we eat. Hopelessness is a feeling, it's not a fact. What kind of people will these ghettos of Palestinians produce? What form of morality, national consciousness and hope will people be left with after so many years of stifling occupation and a sense of hopelessness? My dad was a bartender. My mom was a cashier, a maid and a stock clerk at Kmart. They never made it big. They were never rich. And yet they were successful. Because just a few decades removed from hopelessness, they made possible for us all the things that had been impossible for them. By providing students in our nation with such an education, we help save our children from the clutches of poverty, crime, drugs, and hopelessness. And we help safeguard our nation's prosperity for generations yet unborn. As a relentless romantic, the prospect of being a lonely heart has always had shameful undertones of desperation and hopelessness, and it's society's way of making you feel a failure. When it's said and done, the one thing I want to leave on this earth is hope. I have felt hopelessness, and it's a terrible feeling. Hopelessness will destroy you. I want to bring hope to other people. Isn't it the moment of most profound doubt that gives birth to new certainties? Perhaps hopelessness is the very soil that nourishes human hope. Perhaps one could never find sense in life without first experiencing its absurdity. I went to Iraq because I wanted to see what 1 year of occupation had done to Iraqi society. And I went to the West Bank and Gaza Strip because I wanted to see what 3 generations of occupation had done to Palestinian society. I found a lot more hopelessness and despair in Palestine. Hopelessness is a really toxic and dangerous state. Again, as a gay man I look at that and say there's a hopelessness that surrounds it, but as a human being I look at it and say, why? Where's this disparity coming from? And why can't we as a culture and society dig deeper to examine that? We're terrified of facing ourselves. Europe has never had a single or unified voice in world affairs, a common foreign policy. It has often appeared to be rudderless and unable to make quick decisions when faced with economic crises, presenting instead an image of division and hopelessness. As a Scandinavian, I like hopelessness and the weird austerity in the hopelessness of things. In 2015, 2016 before President Trump, there was a theme of hopelessness that good manufacturing jobs aren't coming back. Obama said you can't just wave a magic wand and bring these jobs back. Well, under President Trump and Ambassador Lighthizer leadership on trade, abracadabra. White America is tortured by Black America's failure to thrive, and all that guilt and anxiety has only gotten worse as a substantial quota of white America loses its own footing in the middle class and plunges into the rough country of joblessness, hopelessness, and government dependency. It's often difficult for those who are lucky enough to have never experienced what true depression is to imagine a life of complete hopelessness, emptiness, and fear. Hopelessness has surprised me with patience. India lived in hopelessness, as the government was not responsive. It did not know what the poor needed. There was complete policy paralysis. Corruption was rampant, and terrorists used to play havoc in the country. Many nights, I would begin the evening fueled by caffeine and nicotine, which I needed to propel me out of torpor and hopelessness, only to overshoot into quaking, quivering anxiety. When today's generation reads Jack's books or they listen to the music created by some of us, I believe that they see there is a different way of approaching today's life and today's sometimes seeming hopelessness that can provide answers. The terrorists thought they would change my aims and stop my ambitions, but nothing changed in my life except this: weakness, fear and hopelessness died. Strength, power and courage were born. Helplessness induces hopelessness, and history attests that loss of hope and not loss of lives is what decides the issue of war. What I learned at home was despair and hopelessness. What I learned at the pictures was don't give up the ship, we have only begun to fight, it's always darkest before the dawn. Some of my memories will never return. They are lost, along with the crippling feeling of defeat and hopelessness. Not a tremendous price to pay. I don't ever remember a single day of hopelessness. I knew from the history of the labor movement, especially of the black people, that it was an undertaking of great trial. That, live or die, I had to stick with it, and we had to win. Rioting is always an expression of rage at the hopelessness of the rioter's condition. People who have been educated well enough to feel that they have a good future in the society in which they live will not riot. There is not racial or ethnic domination of hopelessness. It's everywhere. Today, for a Jew who writes in the German language, it is totally impossible to make a living. In no group do I see as much misery, disappointment, desperation and hopelessness as in Jewish writers who write in German. Since our society equates happiness with youth, we often assume that sorrow, quiet desperation, and hopelessness go hand in hand with getting older. They don't. Emotional pain or numbness are symptoms of living the wrong life, not a long life. The secret is not to give up hope. It's very hard not to, because if you're really doing something worthwhile, I think you will be pushed to the brink of hopelessness before you come through the other side. Extremism can flourish only in an environment where basic governmental social responsibility for the welfare of the people is neglected. Political dictatorship and social hopelessness create the desperation that fuels religious extremism. Still Clean discusses the hopelessness of waiting for someone who's abandoned you. Participation in and of itself is an act against hopelessness. Speaking up is a gesture against hopelessness. I know the air of hopelessness and what people in prison go through. What too few people mention when discussing crime is the degree to which concentrated poverty, hopelessness and despair are the chambermaids of violence and incivility. Visit our website for more quotes, quoting.com.